Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing today, this afternoon? Hope you're all doing well. Today's stream is going to be a little bit different for me. It'll be my first philosophical reading stream. So kind of excited about that. It can be a little difficult sometimes, or I don't know if difficult's the right word, but sometimes can be a little scary reading one's philosophical writing to a new audience, as opposed to just posting it. Like for me, just posting some writing, like putting it out there just as writing, really has never been, that anxiety provoking. But to me, the live context has always had a way of making a difference. Sometimes I ask myself why that is. I think it's because in the back of my mind somewhere, there is this thought, which I have tried to overcome, but maybe have not succeeded completely in. This thought of, like, what if somebody poses a question or an objection that I do not have the answer to? Which can happen, or at least I try to keep the epistemic humility to keep in mind that that could very well happen. So in that eventuality, I suppose what most people would say is that, because I have heard people express this before, of like the thought of going on podcasts or like doing a debate, like saying that it scares them precisely because of that reason. And I'm trying to think of like what I would say to encourage people feeling that way. Because maybe if I could think of what I would say to them, I could encourage myself. Yeah, I mean, there is this part of me that thinks like the very fact that I have any inkling of that feeling at all just shows that I need to make more progress in terms of not caring what people think. Which maybe sounds harsh, but I do think it's true. This is tough love for myself. So the post that I'm going to share with you today, I wrote these a while back. Like for each of them, it's been, I think, maybe several months, or maybe close to a year. But I still agree with them, which is not the case for everything that I write. Sometimes I'll write something and come back to it and then think, like, oh geez. Turns out I don't agree with this anymore. But these two, I still feel pretty, I don't know if confident in this is the right word, but like I still feel like I agree with them. So I'll be curious to hear what anybody has to say about that. By the way, welcome to those who have showed up in the chat. So Tia Fair, good to see you again. Likewise you, Teradito. I recognize you all from some previous streams. So thank you for tuning in. Let's see if I can set this up. I'm going to try to have this set up to where I'm just going to have everything like directly on the screen behind me. But before I do, why don't I go ahead and just in the chat, I'm going to put a pinned comment that links to the post that I'm going to be reading. So that way, in case anybody wants to follow along, they can do so pretty easily. So here is a link to the first one. The title of this post is The Mystery of Automatic Parental Love. And it was inspired by some reflections I was having about parental love for newborns and whether there's a sense in which that poses a philosophical puzzle. So I hope you all will enjoy this post. Let's see if I can get it on the screen behind me. Here. Okay. Oh, that's OBS. Y'all don't want to see OBS, do you? Or maybe you do. It's like a sneak peek behind the scenes. Here, let me transfer OBS to a new window. There we go. That's better. So now I'm just going to bring myself kind of down here. Maybe now you can read the text a little more easily. In fact, maybe I should make it a little bit larger. Okay, yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. All right. So this post is pretty short. In fact, both of the posts that I'm going to read today are not very long. Like you can see, like right now, when I scroll through it, it ends pretty quickly. And so my hope for this is that I could just kind of go through each post and just sort of read it. And then like after each one, we can just pause. And if anybody has any thoughts or questions that they would like to put forth, then we can have maybe a little Q&A, a little discussion. And these can be also like objections. Like if you hear what I'm about to say on this and you think like, hey, that seems mistaken to me, or like, hey, what about this problem? Then by all means, feel free to share that as well. I openly invite that. So here it is, post number 1. The mystery of automatic parental love. Can we make sense of love for newborns? One feature of love that has always struck me as essential for any satisfying account of love to capture, a datum that simply must be accommodated if what we're providing an account of is to deserve the name love, is non-arbitrariness. If I asked of someone who loves me why she loves me, and she said that she didn't have a reason, as if it could just as easily have been that she instead loved some random person across the street, or a tractor, or a rock, or appealed to a reason that struck me as unimportant, such as my having been born on October 27th, I'd be disappointed. And not just disappointed in the sense that it'd have been better for the love to be a response to qualities about me that matter. For example, perhaps something about my personality, or maybe being a morally good person in certain ways. Going beyond this, I'd be forced to question whether what the other person feels for me even deserves to be called love. Love seems to have the sort of value and meaning worthy of the name only when it's in some way grounded in important or love-worthy features of the beloved. This is a major reason why I tend to be sympathetic to theories that view love as being ultimately a kind of perception or appraisal of value. This way of thinking, though, runs into a puzzle. What about parents' love for their children, particularly their newborn children? Many or most parents will say that they loved their children from the moment they first saw them. This is quite possibly the only kind of love at first sight that's widely believed in. Yet newborns haven't yet done anything. They have no accomplishments to speak of, nor have they had a chance to even develop a personality. True, presumably they'll eventually develop a personality and go on to do worthwhile things. Once they do, I could see how it makes sense to love them. But what about before? Why would parents love their children immediately or automatically before the children have had the chance to develop themselves in ways that would make the love make sense? Probably the most common answer here would be something like, I directly participated in the creation of this child. I love him because he's mine. Why, however, would a mere genetic connection or causal relation justify love? It's unclear to me why such considerations would matter in the relevant way. When I think about what kinds of qualities would justify love, I think of qualities that are good. For example, having a heart of kindness. And being something one's responsible for creating doesn't strike me as a good quality, but simply a neutral one. For instance, I might create a random doodle, but I don't love it just because I created it. If I created it isn't a good reason for loving a doodle, why is it any better a reason for loving a baby? Footnote. Some might object that this is not a fair comparison, as immensely more work goes into creating a baby than creating a doodle. Two thoughts come to mind in response. First, the point raised by this objection is no doubt true when it comes to mothers, though it's less clearly the case when it comes to fathers. And since fathers, no less than mothers, presumably tend to love their newborn children, there remains the question of what reason there might be for such love. Second, insofar as the objection relies on the thought that having put a lot of work into creating something justifies loving it, there seem to be plenty of counterexamples. For instance, I put a great deal of effort into the body of work I produced as a college student, but I do not love that body of work. In fact, loving it would, if anything, appear bizarre. If all this is right, then the suggestion, unsettling as it may be, would seem to be that parents have no good reasons, except maybe for purely instrumental ones, to love their newborns. Footnote. For example, perhaps loving one's newborn makes it easier to be a parent thereto, such as by not being bothered as much by, say, frequent crying, having to endure sleeplessness, and so on. Some might think that such a suggestion is in tension with a child's right to be loved. That all children have a right to be loved gives parents an excellent reason to love their newborns. Here, though, I believe that we need to distinguish between the right to be loved and the right to be treated lovingly. While I'd say that children evidently have a right to the latter, such as by being provided with sufficient food, shelter, education, kindness, encouragement, and other things they need, I see no reason for thinking that children have a right that goes beyond this, a right to actually be loved, rather than simply treated lovingly. Some are probably now wondering, okay, but what if you became a parent? What would you envision for yourself then? In that eventuality, I would see my newborn child as having the right to be treated lovingly, and I'd endeavor to treat her accordingly. I don't see, though, how I could bring myself to actually love her. Not until she's developed a personality, started making her own choices, and so on. To the extent that I did feel positively toward her, for example, because of her potential to grow into a full and wonderful person, it'd be a positivity I'd feel toward babies in general, rather than a reflection of anything special about mine. I'm aware that some would probably say that all this makes me, in some fundamental way, not quite human in the way most other people are. But it is what I honestly feel. Of course, I could be wrong about all this. If you believe that there is something that makes it rational, in a more than merely instrumental way, to love one's newborn child, please feel free to share in the comments. Also, feel free to share if you have any other thoughts, questions, or objections. As always, I welcome any discussion. Thank you all for listening. I'll just return to our just chatting. So now, time for some Q&A. If you would like to pose any thoughts in response to what you just heard, then let's chat about it for a little bit. So Tia Fair says, we're both Scorpios? Okay, good to know. Teradito says, always love the silly, serious little things like saying newborns have no achievements. It is undeniably true, though, isn't it? Like, it's tough to build up a good resume as a newborn, you know? Not many chances to put lines on your CV before you're out of the womb. And I'm willing to apply that thought to myself as much as I am to anyone else. Like, when I think back to when I was a newborn, not that I could remember it directly, of course, but just sort of thinking of it abstractly, I am perfectly happy to grant that there was no reason, except maybe a purely instrumental reason, to love me at that point. Though I am grateful, of course, for the love that I did receive. So Teradito says, the sense of love they speak is about loving a person IG, but we can love ideas and things. Guess babies don't really have the full being a person thing. Yeah, I mean, that's another angle to describe it from, that particularly if we're drawn to thinking of, you know, love for persons and like persons as rational beings and beings who have like thoughts and goals, intentions, and like a conception of themselves as, you know, beings with a history and so on. It does become a little trickier maybe to make sense of love for babies in that sense. So Tia Fair asks, what do you think about unconditional love or agape? You touched on it, but kind of missed the point. Okay. Yeah, maybe I did. Yeah, I would say that, to me, at least the most meaningful love, I'm not going to deny that unconditional love exists, but I think love is at its most meaningful when it is conditional, when it does have certain conditions. And that's a claim that surprises a lot of people. They'll say, like, well, wait a minute, like, how could love be most meaningful when it's contingent on things like, you know, having a lot of money or looking really good or like having a lot of accomplishments? And I agree, like, those cases of love are not the ideal to be aiming at. But I think what's wrong with those cases of love is not that they're conditional, but that they're conditional on the wrong things. I think that once we have love that's conditional on the right things, we see that it in fact makes a lot more sense. Like, for example, for somebody who loves me, I would not be bothered at all. And in fact, I would want it to be the case that their love of me is conditional on my being at least a good person, or like at least a minimally decent person. Like, I would not want this person to go on loving me in the hypothetical that I become a moral monster. I think that there would be something defective about a kind of love like that. And that's because I see love as a kind of appraisal of value. And I think that when it comes to appraisals of value, if they have certain conditions that should be attached to them. So that is, and that also I think reflects pretty well my experience of just like how it feels to me when I love someone, is that I'm very drawn to their good qualities. And so, like, if they lost like all of those good qualities and became a monster, then I think I would say, yeah, I would cease to love that person, which means that the love is conditional. But it just doesn't seem to me to be any kind of problem for love to be conditional in that way. What I really worry about when it comes to unconditional love is this sense of arbitrariness. Like, I love you no matter what, like no conditions whatsoever. Well, then it just makes me wonder, like, how could the love be a response to like anything distinctive about me if it doesn't have any conditions whatsoever? Like, if I know that the love the others have for me is conditional on certain, you know, deep aspects of me, then the love feels, I'm trying to think of the right word, more special, more meaningful maybe. than if it's just something that, another person will have for me no matter what. At least that's my sort of natural sense of it. But if anyone wants to push back on that, feel free. In saying all this, by the way, I do realize that this is not a usual point of view. One of my professors in grad school, when I was describing this view, described it as puerile, like a very puerile view of love she thought that I had. So that was kind of fun. Teradito says, hey, rational animals want love to have a reason, a meaning, for it to be meaningful. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Like, certainly, when I think of the love that I have for others or that other people have for me, like, I want it to be meaningful. I don't want it to be this, arbitrary thing that the other person couldn't give any reason for. So Tia Ferris says, I feel like I'm getting to understand where you're coming from. Like, it feels better to be liked for who you are specifically. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Very much so. Let's see, was there anything else about this one? I think more than most positions, this one is tricky, like, rhetorically. It's tricky to express in a way that doesn't come across as seeming inhuman, or that doesn't, offend people, perhaps. Like, if somebody asks, wait, are you telling me that I had no reason to love my newborn child? Like, if I were a politician and this view were out there, like, this is something that my opposing candidate could, like, put out in their political attack ads, and yeah, my numbers in the polls would probably take a beating. But luckily, I'm not a politician, just a philosopher. And I do still think that it's true what I said at the end of the post about how, like, I don't have any kids, but if I were to have kids, then yeah, I think upon their being born, I would have a general positive feeling toward them, but I don't think it would be anything, special about mine. I think it would just be a shared feeling toward babies, toward new humans in general. And I think the love would develop as the child grew into a person, grew into someone who, had a personality, had a history, had achievements, things like that. Tia Fair, I think your concern about unconditional love is a common one, but for me it doesn't have to mean that you let bad people off the hook. I'm going to think about this one a little bit more. And I might be misunderstanding your comment. If I am, you can let me know. But like, if not letting bad people off the hook means that, like, supposing they become a monster, like, you cease loving them, that is that, like, there are conditions under which you would cease loving someone. Like, if that's what it means to not let, like, bad people off the hook, then, I mean, it does seem to me at that point that technically the love is conditional. It might not be conditional on the usual things that we think of when we think of the term unconditional love. But, I mean, if there are conditions under which your love for someone would cease, then yeah, I think it does just seem inevitable at that point. Like, we just have to conclude that, like, in fact, the love is conditional. Though maybe you're not denying that. I might be reading a little too much into what you said. But yeah, when it comes to, like, views about unconditional love in the sort of broader culture, or sorry, views about conditional love in our broader culture, I think it really just gets a bad rap from cases like the stereotypical cases of conditional love. Like, oh, I love such and such person because of, his bank account. Or I love such and such person because they have, great looks. And I actually want to say, like, if that's really your only reason for loving someone, it just seems to me inaccurate to even call it a case of love at all. Like, I think cases of that, like that, just fail to count as love. Maybe we could call them infatuation. Maybe we could call them liking. But yeah, I think love, there's just something in its very nature that makes the word appropriate only when it's, in response to qualities that are more meaningful. So Tia Fair says, okay, you're talking too fast and I can't type in time. My apologies. I'm being a little inconsiderate in my talking speed. I should realize there is a difference in how fast a person can talk and how fast a person can type, including myself. So maybe I'll pause for a bit and give everyone a chance. Also, Thiago Marino, hi. I remember you from some previous streams, so nice to see you again. For those who just joined, the pinned comment in the chat is the post that I just read and that we're now having a little discussion about. So if you want to sort of read it, it's a relatively brief post. You can feel free to click that link and it will take you there. While others are typing comments in the chat, take your time. Oh, hey, physics dude. Welcome. It is good to see you, my friend. Very good to see you. So maybe I'll just play with my orb for a little bit while people are typing. And again, for physics student, for anyone else who just joined, the pinned comment in the chat is a link to a post that I just read, and that we're just sort of having a brief Q&A period. So if you want to sort of see what the discussion has been about, you can click that link. Here in a second, we'll go to the other post, and it says, I will read later. For now, listen to you while washing dishes. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, here in a second, there was another post about love that I wanted to read, and that I'm looking forward to sharing with you all. So that one will be coming right up. Also, I should say that I think, it's the best way to put this. Oh, it says the physics dude saw you were live, but back to my back to your get-togethers. Cheers, brother. Next time. All right, cheers, physics dude. Nice to see you stop in. Tia Fair says, maybe we could say unlimited unconditional love is unviable, but some degree of it is still important, as not everyone has the same amount to offer. Okay, interesting. Let's see here. There's in the back of my mind a thought on that that's a little tricky to articulate, but I'm going to do my best. So, if unlimited unconditional love is unviable, but some degree of it is still important, it just seems to me that unconditional love is not the kind of thing that one could have in degrees. Like, the very word itself, unconditional, just means an absence of conditions. It's a bit like the word unique, where like there's no like such thing as more or less unique. I mean, of course, people often say like, oh, more unique or less unique or most unique, but like technically that's a sort of ungrammatical or erroneous way of speaking. Like, it's an all or nothing property. means like unlike anything else. It seems to me that being unconditional is also an all or nothing property. Like if you have some conditions, even if they're just very slight ones, then I want to say that the love is still conditional. It's just less conditional, maybe, than other kinds of conditional love. Like, there is a scale here, there's no doubt. Like, you can have love be more or less conditional. But it just seems to me like unconditional is a word that should be reserved for only, like, the extreme end of the spectrum of, like, not having any conditions. But I do see you say, I messed up. It's okay, it happens to the best of us. So if you want to like write a follow-up comment clarifying, then yeah, that's totally fine. Part of me now is also wondering whether Disney movies are part of this, like, the idea of unconditional love being kind of promulgated as sort of the hallmark of love, or the pinnacle of love, like the highest peak that love can reach. Like, I'm wondering if there could be a Disney movie that explored conditional love and like presented conditional love, or like the right kind of conditional love, as sort of an ideal to aim at. It's an interesting question, like, or maybe a thought experiment to kind of think, like, what would if it were like a just Disney movie like the others, and if it were set up in like a, you know, high quality way with, you know, good production values and like good story writing and so on, like, could a movie like that succeed? See if Fair says, you mentioned a positivity you'd feel towards babies in general. I also love children despite not having my own. Okay, yeah, that's a nice thought. I think that having, you know, respect for children and liking children is an important thing. Not that, you know, everyone has to like children. And to be fair, like for me too, like I've worked with children in lots of jobs that I've had, or worked with young people in general. And, you know, not every kid is as, you know, easy to have around as every other kid. You know, with some kids there are more challenges, and that's natural. But I suppose, like, at least on, like, if we think of it just on a very general level of having, you know, great valuing for children and, you know, for the next generation and so on, that is something I always have tried to keep close to my heart. So if people want to keep adding comments in this, then by all means feel free, and we can maybe come back to it in a second. I'm just going to go ahead and start shifting to the next post, because the next one is also kind of brief, and it touches on some ideas that are maybe in some way similar, in that it's a post about love, but takes it in a bit of a different direction. So I'll be curious to see what y'all think about that. Okay, yeah, one last comment beforehand. Tia Ferris says, that's unconditional love. And while conditional love may be more ego-boosting, I think unconditional is just as, if not more, meaningful. Okay, you might be right. I could be mistaken on this one. But when you say that's unconditional love, I guess you might be referring to children, maybe? Or like love for children, like love for children in general. Given the context, like what we were talking about a second ago. And yeah, I mean, I guess if one does like love children, well, it depends on the age of the children. Like if it's, you know, like an 8-year-old kid, for example, I feel like that's old enough to like have, you know, developed a personality and to like have a shared history with the parent and to have, you know, done things. So I could see there being a conditional love in that case. Maybe what's unconditional would be like treating the child lovingly. It's like, even if, let's say, like a parent's love is conditional, maybe they are still like going to treat the child lovingly no matter what. And maybe that's something they can remain fully committed to. Yeah, I find that an interesting distinction. And I guess I have to say, like, if it were me, I think probably that's the way that I would think about it. Like if I had a kid and Like, let's just say that they like, let's say like once they grow up, like they just turn out really poorly and become like a serial killer. It's difficult for me to imagine continuing to love them. But maybe there would still be a sense, I think, in which I would try to, treat them lovingly. Like if maybe I would, go and visit them like in prison. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a sad and dark thing to imagine, as philosophy thought experiments sometimes are. But I do think if there is anything in me that would approach that kind of unconditional love, it would be being unconditionally willing to treat someone lovingly. So Joy X says, I love the background music. Thank you. I like it too. Tia Fair says, I think children in the poor, etc. deserve love as they haven't done anything not to deserve it. Without it, only adults, the rich, etc. would be valued. So it is true that children and the poor and like others have not done anything not to deserve it. Probably the easiest case there is just like if we continue thinking about newborns. Like, yeah, they haven't done anything not to deserve love. But then I worry that objection might overgeneralize. Like a rock hasn't done anything not to deserve love. But surely, like, it would be a little strange to love a rock or, a table or anything like that. I think when we're thinking about like whether a given case of love makes sense or seems fitting, just like not having done anything not to deserve love just doesn't seem like enough, at least in my mind. Like I would want to say, like if I asked somebody why they loved me, and they said, oh, well, you haven't done anything not to deserve love. I know I want to say, like, wait, is that it? Like, is that all? Like, I haven't done anything to make you not love me? Like, I would have hoped there would be, something more in their feelings for me than that. But maybe that's just me. Tia Fair says, I don't think it has to be rational either. It could just come from principle. Well, then my question would be, like, just what the principle is. Because it seems to me it might be difficult to specify that without having appealing to reason in some way and making it ultimately a matter of like what reasons we have. And once we get into like what reasons we have, we're into the territory of rationality. Because that's arguably just what rationality is sort of responding to reasons that we have. I mean, poor people have feelings, rocks don't. Okay, true. But then aren't we implying that like there is a standard for like whether things deserve love? It's like having feelings, like make something worthy of love. Yeah, it seems to me there we're back to the conditions of love. It's just like a very like broad condition, like a condition that lots of things, lots of people share. Anyway, feel free again to keep adding comments on this. I'm enjoying the discussion. I'm just going to go ahead and shift to the next one here. Okay, one last one from Thiago Marino. How much biological is love? As an advantage to us? I know it's kind of utilitarian. Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to grant that the causal explanation of love is biological. Like it would appeal like to, I guess, evolutionary considerations of like having like feelings of strong affection for others helped our ancestors to survive and reproduce, and so like that's why we have them now, is to like encourage us to mate with others, produce offspring. It's like all of that sounds right, but I want to say like when it comes to understanding what love itself is, it seems to me that it's in principle independent of the biology. Like for example, if like say tomorrow a wizard were to like turn me into like a spirit being, like one that had no biology. I no longer had a body, no cells, no anything like that. But like I still had the mind that I have now and still had the feelings that I have now. I would want to say like I still would have love for people. Which raises the question of, okay, like then just what is that love? And I think by the very conditions of the thought experiment, we wouldn't be able to understand it as essentially a biological phenomenon. So anyway, let's proceed now to the next post. We can still keep talking about this one in a bit if people still have thoughts that they want to share on it. I'm just going to scoot down to the end here. And this next one is, in a way, like if you were there for my debut stream for the short story that I read about immortality, you're going to see this one has some connections to that. There are definitely some connections here, but also some new thoughts. The title of this post is, "Given Eternity, Would All Sense of Specialness Wither? An Unexpected Connection Between Immortality and Love." And again, like the other one, it's a relatively short post, so it shouldn't take me too long to read it. Then we'll have some Q&A after. How fortunate we are for our finitude. Were we to live forever, all would one day become boring and bland. Death is what makes our experiences special. So goes one oft-embraced thought in the debate over whether immortality would be desirable. Bernard Williams, for instance, in what is perhaps the most iconic defense of this view, writes, "Immortality, or a state without death, would be meaningless. So in a sense, death gives the meaning to life. Immortality would be, where conceivable at all, intolerable." And here, more recently, but in a similar vein, is Shelley Kagan. "There is no life that I am able to imagine for myself that is one that I would want to take on forever." What I'm about to say might sound strange, but it is an honest report of my reaction. Whenever I hear someone suggest that everything would become boring and bland and meaningless for him if he lived forever, I find myself wondering whether he's ever had a friend, enjoyed a walk in nature, or spent time with a loved one. Some experiences, like these, simply strike me as if they would never lose their specialness. Other examples readily suggest themselves, such as getting into bed when tired. Ask yourself now, do you feel that this would ever get old? I certainly don't. In thinking this way, I'm sympathetic to John Martin Fisher, who, in a critique of Williams's above-mentioned argument, writes, "I get extraordinary pleasure from listening to Bach's second partita for the unaccompanied violin, and I see no reason why it would cease to be a repeatable pleasure if part of an immortal life, in which there were an appropriate mix of activities and pleasures. Certainly, there are other such pleasures, such as the pleasures of visiting a great art museum, or a great and beautiful city, such as Paris, Venice, or San Francisco. I cannot imagine ever getting tired of the view of the city of San Francisco from the Golden Gate Bridge, or the feeling of the fog engulfing me in Golden Gate Park, or the beautiful plaintive sound of the foghorns in the distance. I have no tendency to think that these pleasures would become less compelling unless pursued in a single-minded or compulsive fashion." The last clause that Fisher adds above is important. In any eternal existence worth having, presumably you wouldn't just be doing a particular kind of experience over and over again. There'd need to be some variety and breathing room, some element to mix things up. Petting a cat, for instance, is an activity I can easily imagine to be forever enjoyable to come back to, provided that there's enough of a break between time spent with cats and time spent doing other things, and that the time spent doing other things includes a sufficient variety of activities. I wouldn't want to spend eternity doing nothing but petting a cat. For that matter, the cat probably wouldn't want this either. As long as we keep in mind this caveat about variety, then it seems to me that the specialness of certain kinds of experiences would always endure. Perhaps all this is naive of me to think, given that I haven't lived forever to test whether the specialness would in fact persist. However, in my admittedly limited time so far, such experiences haven't become any less special. If anything, as I've grown older, my capacity for appreciation has deepened, and I've come to find experiences more special, not less. While certainly not decisive, perhaps that is nevertheless a clue, a spark of a deeper truth. But now I'd like to propose a new idea. Whether our experiences would remain special and fulfilling in an eternal existence, or whether we'd be eventually beset by pervasive and inescapable ennui, is in part a mark of how deeply we love. Imagine, for instance, someone who at the moment seems in many or most ways to love her partner, a partner whom she's just recently found, but that she, alas, in about a week, will lose all her draw to him and will come to find interacting with him to be a chore. Further, suppose that this change in her sentiment isn't because she becomes depressed, or because her partner suddenly becomes a worse person, or anything like that. Instead, it's simply and flatly that she becomes bored with him. To me, and I suspect to most people, this stipulation about how quickly she loses interest in him calls into question the extent to which she loved him. Indeed, it'd seem fair to doubt whether she ever had any love for him at all. Now imagine a case much like the above, except that instead of losing interest in her partner in a week, it's 6 months. While it's a bit more plausible that there was at least some initial love in this latter case, any such love would appear not to have been very deep. Not as deep as if her interest in him had lasted yet longer. We can imagine various further versions of this case, ones where the loss of interest occurs in a year, 5 years, 10 years, or longer still. My proposal is this. For any such case, the love that this person might once have had for her partner will be deeper than in a version where she loses interest earlier, but not as deep as in a version where she loses interest later. And should that indeed be true, then the deepest love will be present in a case where she'd never become bored with her partner, would never come to find her interactions with him unfulfilling. In this way, the extent to which we'd persist in finding interactions with someone to be special and worth continuing seems to bear on how deep our love for him is. I find nothing personally unsettling in this idea, as I believe that interactions with those I love are among the things I'd always find fulfillment in, even were I to live forever. But what if I believed otherwise? What if I felt, as some people do, that in an eternal existence, I'd inevitably become bored with everything, even spending time with those I love? Then it seems to me that I'd be forced to accept the discomforting implication that my love for those who are most special to me is not as great as it'd otherwise be. At least, such an implication would be discomforting for anyone who believes that our love for those who are most special to us, such as our family, should be as great as possible. Or even more moderately, that there's something sad or regrettable about a love that falls short of this. Perhaps all this is why, whenever I hear someone suggest that immortality would lead to crushing boredom, and that this shows death to be a good thing in the end, I find myself not simply thinking, but hoping that such an argument is mistaken. If indeed, in an eternal existence, all would inevitably become bland, that would mean that there's a depth of love that's tragically inaccessible to us. So thank you everyone for listening to that. I realized that I neglected to include a link to it in the chat, so my apologies for that. But if you would like to have a link to that post now, I have just included it. So let me go ahead and pin that one. Okay, so that one should now be easy to see. Let's chat about it for a bit. Wonderful comment here from TFAir. Have you ever considered that you're simply idiosyncratic? Yes, that is a possibility. It might just be me with many of these things. Oh, and then I see some earlier comments too. Teradito says, hell yeah, I can agree that eternity can be nice and that petting cats is great. Yes, high five, Teradito. I mean, like, if there were cats in eternity, then that would certainly be a good thing. I don't know if it would be as worthwhile without cats. It'd be a harder sell, you know? Eternal life without cats. Maybe it could still work, but the cats definitely help. The thought that maybe there's no unlimited wellspring of love. Yeah, it's a thought that I think a lot of people would find unsettling, because, like, if you were to ask many or most people what they think about people they love, or like how much they love those who are closest to them, I think they would want to say, like, there's no limit to it, or like it's as great as possible, or that, like, there's something confused about the question, like it just can't be measured. And so I think that views that to the effect that eternal life would just become boring and unfulfilling, it seems to me they run into a certain tension with those who think about love this way. So Tia Fair, like in the other post, you said you don't love the things you make, but a lot of people out there do, and to a detriment. Okay, yeah, I mean, no doubt about that. That for many people, they do love things that they make. And that might even apply to me to an extent, like for certain things I make. It's like not for like the body of work I produced as a college student, because that just seems a bit distant now, and I've made better things since then. But maybe some things, like I can certainly understand the sense of, loving one's work, one's creations. That last note you mentioned is interesting, and to a detriment. Oh, like maybe they love it so much that it interferes with other things, or they love it to an unhealthy extent. Yeah, I suppose that could be possible. Like, let's say what you love is, underwater basket weaving, and you do that so much that like you don't that you don't like have time for a family, or like for taking care of your health. Like at that point, like I know I and many other people would want to say, like, look, it's great that you love this hobby, but like, step away from the basket. Like, put the basket down. So yeah, that can happen sometimes. On the note about me being idiosyncratic, there was once a comment that I read from, I believe it was on Twitter. Someone shared a sample of my work, and one of the comments in response to it was, I would like to congratulate this person on having graduated from college without ever having met another human being. So yeah, some have told me that I have strange intuitions about things like this. Haha, I meant the kind of people who refuse to accept criticism because they're too attached. Okay, yeah, that is okay, good clarification. Yeah, if somebody's not willing to listen to criticism on something, that does seem bad. Like, it seems pretty close-minded. And there's a part of me that wants to say maybe, like, one could be attached to something, like, to whatever extent. Like, even, like, maximally attached to something, but, like, still be willing to accept criticism. Like, maybe the unwillingness to accept criticism, like, isn't always a matter of being too attached, but maybe it's a matter of like other things, like so what would be the best way to put this? Maybe like not distinguishing between the value of one's projects and like one's own value as a person, like thinking that they're too linked up to each other. And so like interpreting any criticism of the product as like a criticism of the core of one's being. I could see that being a source of unwillingness to accept criticism. Or maybe it does come from being, too attached. Maybe there is a limit to how attached one should be. This is something that I don't really have a settled view on. Thiago Marino says, I'm married for 11 years now. Love is hard to measure. But thinking about how much time we're together, love is not a constant value. It needs work, maintenance, and much patience. That's very nicely put, Thiago. And it brings up an interesting point in its own right, that maybe the degree of love we have for someone changes. Maybe it's not that we always just have the same amount of love, like every hour of the day, every day of the week, but maybe it fluctuates a little bit. Like if we have, like, let's say an argument or something, and things are going poorly one day, maybe the degree of love is less than on a day when things are going well. I know many people would be resistant to thinking of it in that way. Like many people would want to say, like, no, the degree of love is the same, even if like we're feeling frustration, or if things aren't going well as on a certain day. But they could be wrong about that. Maybe the love does fluctuate some, and like as long as there's still like some love, or like still a significant amount of love, even when it's fluctuating, maybe that's what matters most. Tia Fair says, in my experience, some of the oddities we observe about the world can be explained with I'm the odd one. Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's sometimes there's nothing more to say. Not that being idiosyncratic is a bad thing, or it'd also be bad. True, yeah, I think that if other people who are eccentric in some ways or idiosyncratic in some ways were not that way, there's no doubt that in some ways life would be easier, but it's not a life I would want. Like, I'm very grateful for the qualities that make me distinctive, and I like that you feel that way about yourself too, or at least seem to feel that way about yourself, Tia Fair. Iago Marino, I think I don't love my wife as intensely as our first year, but even in crisis, and today it is in crisis, there is a deep sense of care and respect. Yeah, I think that's also an interesting way of putting it, that the nature of the love might change in times of crisis, but maybe what's always present is that sort of care and respect. And maybe in times when things are going a bit better, maybe like in addition to the care and respect, there's something else, like deep affection, that maybe is not always as present in the times of crisis. But maybe the core of love, if it's like a care and respect type thing, maybe that is sort of more stable. Yeah, I could see that being the case in a lot of cases. Teradito asks, could love be divided in possibilities, recent and old actions, future, present, and past? The love of newborns seems more of possibilities, while loving the departed is exclusively from the past. Yeah, I mean, it does seem that considerations of time come into play in certain ways. Like, you might love someone because of like having done lots of things with them and like having had lots of good experiences with them, and that appeals to a shared history. It's like that's backwards looking in a way. It looks at the past to justify one's love of someone in the present. And then loving someone for their like future possibilities, as you bring up for newborns. I mean, yeah, it seems to me like that's really the only thing, I guess, about newborns one could appeal to as like a property of the newborn that would justify love for them, is like the possibility, or like their possibilities to grow and develop into wonderful people. So yeah, maybe one could say that. I was going to say something else, but I think I might have lost. Oh yeah, here it is. So the thing about possibilities is it also seems to me that that applies to like lots and lots of people, maybe even just like people in general. So not just newborns, like every person has possibility, except maybe for like those who are like, very close to death, maybe they don't have, a future of broad possibilities left for them. But it does seem that people in general are alike in that, they could like go on to do good things, or could go on to become a good person or a better person than they are now. And so when it comes to love for newborns, like love for one's own newborn child, yeah, it still seems to me like difficult to distinguish between why, like if the newborn's possibility of developing into a good person is why you love them, and like why you wouldn't likewise just love everyone else who has that possibility. So that would be one question I would have. But I do acknowledge that is probably the way that lots of people think about it. Like when they think about their newborn, they probably are, at least oftentimes, thinking of like, hey, what might this person become in the future? T. Ferris says, anyway, I'm not sure what to say about the specialness of immortality, since you seem to be arguing from your own subjective experience. I can't be like, no, your experience is wrong. Well, true, I mean, yeah, it does seem like a bit of a non-starter to say like, like, no, you haven't enjoyed your experiences so far, or no, you wouldn't. You don't have the intuition that continuing to have these experiences eternally would remain fulfilling, forever. But I mean, there are ways to challenge what I say about immortality. There's no doubt about that. Like, for example, you could say, yes, Axan, like, even though like you have this intuition or this subjective experience of, enjoying your life so far, or, feeling that the pleasures in your life are infinitely repeatable, maybe there are reasons to distrust that intuition. So like, if you could point me to some reasons to think that like, hey, maybe that intuition is not very reliable, then yeah, like I think that would be a way of putting pressure on my argument. No doubt about that. Because that is one of the really good ways of putting pressure on someone's argument, if you can show that the intuitions behind their premises are like intuitions that we have reason to distrust, reasons not to put much stock in. So I acknowledge at least the possibility for, that kind of critique of the argument that I've offered. Or at the very least, one thing I think I would say there is that if it turns out that the appeal to subjective experience and the arguments I've offered for why immortality would not be bad is problematic, then it would also seem to me that a similar problem would afflict arguments that immortality would be bad. In other words, like any view one has on this question of whether immortality would be bad, like any stand one can take on it, I think is ultimately going to have to be informed by one's own experience in some way. And I know you're not denying that, so I don't want to be clear. I'm not putting this forth as disagreeing with anything you're saying. It's just an observation on my part that, like, those who say that immortality will become boring and unfulfilling, like, it seems to me that they're inevitably reflecting on their own experience of things and just their natural intuitive sense that, like, they would get bored if they had to do this thing forever. Which maybe they would. It is tricky to extrapolate sometimes into eternity, which I think is a good reason why, like, for any view one has on this debate, one should embrace it with a certain tentativeness. You know, it's important to avoid dogmatism and being overconfident of the claims one makes. It's always important to make sure that one is open to, you know, being proven wrong. I think there are more salient questions to ask about immortality than would immortality be fun? Okay, maybe there are. Yeah, I don't doubt that. I'd be curious to know, like, what some of those other questions are. But I mean, there are lots of questions one could ask about immortality, and maybe some of them are more interesting questions than would immortality be fun. Yeah, this is just one of the questions about it that I find interesting, but it is of course true. There are many others. Teradito says, if immortality isn't fun, not enjoyable, then that's a lot of the appeal for an individual gone, no? Yeah, no, I'd say that's correct. Like, if somebody truly is such that they would become bored of life in immortality, then I think that does possibly settle the matter of whether immortality is desirable for them. Maybe just to the point where just immortality would not be desirable for them. Or even if it doesn't, like, settle that, it's at the very least a strong reason for thinking that immortality would be undesirable for that individual. Like, that seems fair. See, Thiago Marino says, perhaps if you are immortal, seeking experiences would go live in addiction, seeking more and more intense experiences to fulfill your needs. Oh yeah, like maybe maybe it would be like, oh, I've already, you know, what would be a good example? Like, I've already flown around the world in a blimp once. Like, now I need to do it in a fighter jet. Or I've already walked around the world once, now I need to run. Or like, now I need to, like, I've already written one book, now I need to write two. Now I need to, like, write infinity books. Like, maybe it just always escalates. I could see that being especially a phenomenon that happens if one, like, remembers all of one's experiences. It's like, if your mind is somehow set up such that, like, no matter how far back you go into the past, you will remember in pretty good detail, like, everything you've ever done. And yeah, I can see how you might feel drawn to doing things that are more and more extreme just because they're new. If we make room for forgetting, that is, like, once one goes back into the past far enough, one starts to forget one's experiences, then it seems to me maybe a little more plausible that there wouldn't be this need to always, like, have more extreme experiences, because one would eventually, you know, forget the previous times doing them. Of course, even if there is this need for new experiences, like more extreme experiences, I suppose that could be fine. You know, maybe with an immortal life, I mean, obviously, I guess there wouldn't be any risk of death if one is immortal, like, in the sense that one can't be killed. If one is immortal in that sense, and not just in the sense of, like, not aging, then yeah, the whatever extreme experiences or, like, stunts or whatever it is one's doing, they wouldn't pose a risk of death to oneself. So at least there would be that. point in their disfavor that would no longer be present. Seafarer says, how about this? What if you were immortal, but cats went extinct, you became disfigured, and everyone bullied you? So yeah, well, that would make me sad, the cats going extinct and my becoming disfigured and everyone bullying me. I mean, I am willing to grant that there is a certain threshold for quality of life upon which I would no longer find immortal life to be worth living. Like, especially if we add that I were in constant pain, like pain that made it very difficult or impossible to focus on things that mattered to me. And if the pain were not able to be cured, I just had to sort of take it, then yeah, I'd be willing to grant that at that point it would be preferable for me to die, if dying were possible. If it's just a case of, yeah, me becoming disfigured, everyone bullying me, cats going extinct, I would want to say that, like, even with those conditions, I think there could still be enough other things in my life to make my life feel worth living. Like, let's say I could still work on my writing, still work on my projects, or still, like, experience the beauty of nature, still go on walks, maybe, things like that. Still, you know, think about philosophy, still engage in all those kinds of projects. Then I would want to say for me, that would be enough. I think the threshold at which one's life becomes not worth living is a pretty extreme threshold, so it would take a lot. It's possible to reach that threshold, but I think it would take a great deal for me to have to reach that point. Maybe the appeal of immortality is linked to how privileged your life is, no different from how it is with mortal life. I mean, yeah, that's probably fair. So, yeah, I guess it goes back to the point that if your life is truly awful, where it's just constant suffering, then yes, it does seem right to say that immortal life then would no longer be desirable for you. Kind of funny how we derailed to the immortality question, maybe because that's easier to think about than love. It probably is, actually, yeah. Like, the question of, like, what love is, the nature of love, these have always struck me as very challenging questions. And I mean, immortality is too, but something about it does seem a little more approachable than the question about love. So I don't deny that. Well, if the brain works different to erase and balance memories, the brain could also experience imaginary scenarios as real and fulfilling as real-life experience. Likewise, an excellent point. Yeah, like, even if your real-world life is not going so well, like, let's say at this future hypothetical time, they had really, really good VR technology. So you could just, like, strap on a VR headset and just, like, instantly be transported to another world where things are going a lot better. Like, where you're this cool person that everyone likes and you're doing all these wonderful, meaningful things. Then yeah, maybe that could be enough to keep life worth living. Just as, like, presumably, like, other kinds of escapist media that we have today, like, you know, reading good books, good works of fiction, or, like, watching great movies, or playing, you know, well done, fun video games. Like, all those are things that can help make a person's life worth living. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason to think that wouldn't be the case in the future, that those could still be sources of value for a life, and maybe to an even greater extent than they are now, at least with, like, the video games, if we continue making advancements and, you know, the immersion of games and so on. So I do think that's a very fair point to raise, Thiago. In just a second, I'm probably going to head out. I was considering maybe reading another post for today, but I think probably 2 is a good point to end it on. But before I do go, though, I just want to make sure I'm not cutting anyone off, not steamrolling over anyone. So I'll wait around for a little while longer, and we can just see if anyone had any further comments or questions, and we can continue the discussion from there. But if not, that's okay too. T-Bear says, this was fun. Thanks for the stream. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for your comments. You know, it would have been really awkward and lonely if I had logged in for this stream and like no one was here or no one was commenting. So I'm very glad that people were here. Now, to be clear, like if nobody showed up, I would still have given the stream. I would still have read the posts and sat here in the thought that maybe someone would come. So I would have taken it, taken it like a champ, but it is a lot more pleasant not to have to face that situation. And so people's comments here, like you, Teradito, Thiago Marino, TFR, all of you, you've certainly given me some things to think about. And there will be more streams in the future too. There will be more readings, whether it's readings of my Substack posts or other things. So this will certainly not be the last philosophy reading stream. Yago says, to me, all is good. Thanks for the company. The dishes are all clean, haha. Well, glad I could help you in this very indirect, very modest way with your dishes. So thank you for letting me know that. That does delight me to know that it was helpful. And likewise for you, Teradito. Thank you for your comment. All right, well, I'll be doing, more streams on this in the future. In the meantime, be well, everyone. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day and that philosophical thoughts continue to visit your mind. So goodbye for now. Bye, everybody.